They didn't want it to be like that. They didn't want what was happening. They were the believers. They had hitched their life to his. He was one of theirs. He was their teacher, yes, but also a mouth they could feed in gratitude, a body they could anoint. That their Jesus was taken and killed, they had to ask. They had to ask now what they believed, whether what he taught mattered. And then they had to learn that what he taught lived on, that they could be a community without him, that they could still live by the best of the ancient Jewish wisdom that he shared and reinterpreted for their times. And still, it was not the same. Something had died. Something was different. Part of it, the teachings and the way of being together, was resurrected, but the form was different. The form was different. We do not want it to be this way. A world increasingly devoid of natural places in their wild state, air and water defiled, resources increasingly depleted. We want to restore the whole world to health again, to return to days of pristine wilderness that we think of in our dreams. And yet we know if we think about it, that those days are gone. If we are to know a healthier world today or in the future, it will be a different kind of world, a different kind of green, a world of urban gardens, of recycled furniture, of lower impact lifestyles. If that rebirth is to happen, something new will have to be born. Something new will have to be born. We don't want it to be this way. A new economy restored for some and not working for many, many others. A time of belt tightening and philanthropic restraint, juxtaposed against an escalating need, until we have almost no resources to help our families in need find decent housing in our communities, or a way to feed all who are hungry, let alone to find the jobs which pay a living wage. And even though we can see the buds, the seeds, the sparks of renewal possible around us, we will not be bursting into the same kind of expansiveness we knew before 2008. We know that now. For many, economic opportunity still waits in a tomb, waiting for someone to roll away the stone. You, sitting out there, you may not want it to be this way. Something may have changed in your life. Someone or something may have been lost. A loved one, a relationship, a sense of yourself as a particular person with a particular set of abilities. And what is trying to be reborn will be a new life. It will be something good with possibility and hope. And it will not be exactly the same life it was before. When the grieving lessens, what may enter into the new space created will be something different. That hope renewed is not the same hope you had before. It is different. Now we have a symbol of hope that we rekindle every week. It's the symbol of our chalice. And it reminds us that the light of truth, all those lights from all those different teachings that we take into our midst, are renewed each generation. And it also reminds us that each generation needs its own light of truth. The flame each week is in the same place, roughly, we hope, but it's not exactly the same flame. Its colors change, its height changes. It's a different flickering. And I think the message of Easter is like that hope. It's like this flame. It will rise up again. What it brings forth may not look exactly like what we had before. It may not actually look much at all like much at the beginning. It may be just a small kindling. And it reminds us, this Easter, that hope and possibility can only be reborn into our lives if we choose them, if we decide, like Jesus' followers, that somehow we're going to go there, even though we don't know how we're going to do that, and we're going to push away that stone, and we're going to reclaim what is ours, what is left of our precious hope. I often think of the Easter story from the perspective of Jesus' followers, because they were the ones who had changed their lives, had adapted his teachings. They were following him. They had actually come to even venerate and worship him because they needed so much in the society that they lived in, the hopes that he offered, the power that he named in them that they began to see, sometimes for the first time. And when it became clear to them that he was not going to survive physically, that he was not going to triumph over the corrupt powers of his time, some of his followers did abandon him. But 3 women, as Melissa said, did go to his tomb to show their respect to their precious one. They didn't know, as I said, how they were going to move that heavy boulder of loss which stood between them and their beloved teacher. They only knew that they had to find a way to keep the hope without which they could no longer live. It was only after he was gone that they realized that he had said, "The kingdom of God is within you." And he meant that they too carry the promise, each of them. And that hope became part of them and their lives in a new way. So the miracle of Easter for me is not that a man was raised from the dead. It is that the principles and the parables that he taught, Jewish wisdom in a new way, a new dialogue for his time, lived on. And in this way, in this limited but very powerful way, love was stronger than death. And that made the poor and the scorned who had followed him remember their own power that he had helped them see. And it reaffirmed the actions of the well-to-do who had turned aside well-anointed but very empty lives to follow him as well. When the resurrection happens in this story, what was before is still gone, because what comes later is different. It's not the same. The way that the communities gather without Jesus is different. The way that we look for hope in our world when things change is different. The experience of loss and grief gives them a new vision. As Sarah Moores Campbell writes, "Grateful for the darkness which has nourished us, we push away the stone and invite the light to awaken us to the possibilities within us and among us, possibilities for new life in ourselves and in our world." Now this morning, when I was up at 6 a.m., I was finishing this homily just a little bit. And I was getting ready for one of the weird traditions that have come to be true in our household, which is that on Easter morning, despite my choice of career, which makes this not convenient, I made something we call hot uncrossed buns. So I was getting ready to do that. And it was 6 o'clock, and both of my greyhounds came to me, and they were both very concerned. And I thought perhaps they were concerned because yesterday, in what was a rather hairy day, I had forgotten to get them new food. So they had a little bit smaller ration than they usually had. And I thought that was good reason for concern. But they were more concerned than that. And I realized they were concerned because right down the street, a block away from me, is the Baptist church. And they were having their sunrise service. And my dogs could hear the people singing, and they wanted to know, why on earth are people doing that at this hour? Theological interpretation with greyhounds is something of an art. But I explained to them that the reason that people had arose at a very early hour and had gathered on the hillside down the street from me was because they needed hope. The dogs seemed to accept that. They went and laid back down. The hope that we find may not be as giddy or as joyful as it was before the loss, and yet it is stronger, it's more resilient, because this time we choose it with eyes that have seen through the dark. This time it lives within us. It's not dependent on some outside force. The place that you live, the new place that you live, won't be the same as the old place you lived before. The way you see the world won't be exactly the same. And the cycle of birth and death and birth becomes a backdrop against which new light can shine. The poet James Broughton says it like this: shake out your qualms, shake up your dreams, deepen your roots, extend your branches, trust deep water and head for the open. Even if your vision shipwrecks you, quit your addiction to sneer and complain. Open a lookout, dance on a brink, run with your wildflower. You are closer to glory, leaping an abyss, than upholstering a rut. When hope arises again, reborn like the flame, it is into a new brilliance. When we choose hope anew, then it's more truly ours. So let us, on this beautiful Easter Sunday morning we have been given, with the radiance of the earth all around us, let hope rise up in our heart, and let us say, Alleluia.